Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon when it is such a gorgeous day outside. We know we're competing with the weather today. We're so grateful that you could all join us this afternoon for this In Focus lecture today. My name's Emma Rathie. I'm the Manager of Programs and Exhibition Production here at the museum. If you haven't attended an In Focus lecture before, so many of the projects that we do here are behind the scenes. They don't end in like an exhibition that you can come visit. So this series really lets us highlight so many of the projects that we're working on downstairs. And so Kirk can lift the veil a little bit today on some projects that have occurred in the past couple of years. Like mentioned, today you're going to hear from Kirk McDowell, Associate Collection Manager in the Moving Image Department. He's going to talk about the world of lost films, what they are, how they're found, and what happens once they reach the archive. He's also going to be discussing recent acquisitions, as well as highlighting the collection management and conservation work that takes place in these films. And so I'm just going to pass it right over to Kirk.
All right, thank you all for coming out today. It's one of the most gorgeous days I've seen in a long time, so you might be making a mistake, but I tend to run short, so you'll be out in the sunshine with plenty of time. Hello, my name's Kirk McDowell. I'm Associate Collection Manager in the Moving Image Department here at the George Eastman Museum. Thank you for coming today for this In Focus talk entitled Lost Films Found. Broadly, I want to divide this short talk into those two categories, lost and found. First, speaking very generally about what it means for a film to be lost and the various ways films become lost. And then moving on to just some specific examples of films that have been found both here at the George Eastman Museum and elsewhere. Should mention up front that I'm going to be talking about lost films from a collection management perspective. Work in collection management, so I'm concerned with the ways in which films come to the archive, the condition they're in, how we can best serve and conserve the physical object so it can have the longest life. I won't be talking about the preservation aspect of lost films, so there won't be anything regarding photochemical preservation, digitization and scanning, or the reconstruction and restoration of digital elements. If you're interested in hearing about that work, Preservation Manager Anthony Labate and Senior Curator Peter Bagrov actually spoke last month another In Focus talk about the challenges of reconstruction, and that talk is available on our YouTube page, so feel free to give that a watch if you're interested in that sort of thing. Also wanted to mention a lot of this focus is on older films, mostly the silent era, which is not meant to discount that many lost films exist in the post-silent, post-nitrate era. In fact, probably one of the biggest areas of lost films is happening now with all of the digital material because there's just such a profusion of it. But that is such a big topic that I'm not even going to get into that today. Just have this graphic up just to kind of reiterate these stages in a film's life. Very, very roughly kind of constructed here into the commercial history of a film's production, distribution, exhibition, and then also kind of the other end of the life cycle when a film comes to an archive, the conservation work when the donation or acquisition is made, rather. Hopefully, eventually preservation work if that material is unique. And then the end that we hope that all things come to is access, so people can actually see what's come into the archive. Also worth noting is that middle section, which is I think of interest because it's where it's the provenance information, that kind of space between when a thing is made and when it comes to an archive. It's also probably the time in a film's life when it's most likely to be lost. Is that it's had its exhibition run if it's a commercial film. It hasn't made it to an archive. That's kind of the area where things tend to go missing. So, which brings me to the first section of this bifurcated presentation. Just want to talk a little about what we mean when we say lost films. I want to look at two very available online definitions of lost films because I think they bounce off each other very well and kind of help us delineate the boundaries of what we're talking about. So here's the first one. This is the definition that's currently on the lost film Wikipedia page. It defines a lost film as, quote, a feature or short film in which the original negative or copies are not known to exist in any studio archive, private collection, or public archive. This is a pretty good definition that I think most film archivists would agree with. I think the operative phrase here is not known to exist, which situates the condition of lostness on knowledge. And it's unsaid here, but I think implied that it's specifically a broad kind of knowledge we're talking about, the knowledge of public record. If a single collector, for instance, had a copy of a lost film, say Convention City, for example, and didn't tell anyone that she had it, for all intents and purposes, that is still a lost film. I'll bring up something very close to this example later. The second definition comes from the Lost Media subreddit, which is currently followed by over 300,000 users, so it's very out there. And it defines the general category of lost media as, quote, media which is lost to the general public, that this media was intended to be viewable or at some point was viewable to the public, but no longer is. Now you can see a difference here. This definition is all about access instead of knowledge of existence. So I think a lot of film archivists would push back against this kind of definition and point out that just because a film is unavailable does not mean it is necessarily lost. Sometimes films that are known to exist in archives are restricted because of donor agreements or loan agreements, and they remain unavailable for home viewing or sometimes even research appointments, depending on the strictness of the agreements. Although these situations are frustrating because these elements for films exist and are being cared for by archival institutions, we should not consider them as lost. But I think rather than just pointing out that I don't agree with this definition, I think the important here is that it highlights the issue of access. Although we don't consider an extant but inaccessible film lost, the fact that a good portion of the public does shows it's not enough for unique material to be conserved or preserved when it is of wide interest, but access is a crucial part of that life cycle. So how do films become lost? At first glance, it's one of those things. It seems strange that the medium, which is so young, film, is about 130 years old at this point, could have such a checkered survival rate. And you may hear stats thrown around. It's such a large thing to try and estimate, but people range from 70 to 90% of silent feature films are lost. It's a large percentage. But really, a lot of this is due to a number of things here, and these are kind of the four categories I'm going to look at today about why films get lost. And two of them have to do with a kind of tragic flaw of film's beginning, what the Greeks might call hamartia, the kind of tragic flaw that comes back to bite you. So nitrate film, as you may know, is both flammable and will decay as an organic material. There has also been, in the past, a fair amount of intentional destruction, which I'll talk about, and also cataloging issues may result in a film being lost. All right. So starting out with the big and sexy one here, nitrate fires. So the history of nitrate fires could present a whole presentation in itself. And I think if you are interested in the history of nitrate fires, this film is Dangerous. It's a great book to go check out because it's exhaustive in the detail it goes into. There's, in fact, a section of it that just kind of goes month by month throughout film history of all the different fires that have happened in theaters and archives. But two major ones to pinpoint here that have resulted in a lot of lost films are, I would say, probably the two most notable nitrate fires in film history. So that first one, on July 9th, 1937, a fire broke out in the Fox Film Storage Building in Little Ferry, New Jersey, quickly spreading to all 40-odd vaults that were there and destroying 40,000 reels of film. 57 truckloads of scrap were hauled away from that fire for silver recovery. And largely due to that fire, about 75% of feature films produced by Fox before 1930 are lost. So there, as I think Dave Kerr has pointed out, that there are entire careers that don't exist anymore because of that fire. A lot of Fox stars, such as Theda Bara, her filmography was decimated by the elements lost in that fire. And about 30 years after that, on August 10th, 1965, there was a fire at the MGM backlot in Vault 7, which also completely destroyed its contents. And some of the results of that fire were the loss of London After Midnight, the Lon Chaney film that you may have heard of, probably one of the most famous lost films that is very sought after, and also Greta Garbo's The Divine Woman, as well as many, many, many others. I should mention that there was even a fire here at George Eastman Museum in 1975. Luckily, in this case, it was a lot of material that had already been copied to acetate stock, so the losses were much, much less than fires like this. But it was, I believe, out kind of by, the structure I don't think exists, but it was that kind of barn area over to the side. And I want to mention that for the most part, nitrate fires that are associated with film archives are much less common than they used to be because of HVAC systems, temperature and humidity control. It's just much more standardized and understood as a necessity than it used to be. When nitrate fires do happen, it's usually because overflow films, institutions have too many films, and they're storing overflow films in spaces where they shouldn't be, spaces that don't have temperature control. So they're allowed to kind of get into a situation where combustion is much more possible. Because HVAC is one of the most expensive, unsexy, hard to fund areas of film preservation, it will probably still occur at some level. But the more that's kind of understood as a necessity, the less it will happen. And I also wanted to note here in regards to George Eastman Museum that the strong vaults outside, if you kind of head towards University, were the first film vaults in the United States specifically built for storing nitrate film, with some manner of HVAC system eventually. So we were on top of it early. And now it's stored for landscaping equipment, so don't get worried that there's films. It's a little rough for wear right now. All right, decomposition. Not only is nitrate film extremely flammable, it's an organic compound subject to decay. The degree of decomposition can be roughly sorted into 5 stages seen here. First, some amount of image loss, then a tacky quality or stickiness while unwinding the film. This is followed by further kind of gooifying with what we kind of call honey that oozes out of the surface of the film. Then a solidification into a crunchy crystalline mass, and ultimately the material becomes a fine brown powder. Throughout all of these stages, there's an increasing acrid smell like sweat and sour milk. About 40 years ago or so, there was a lot of concern about how fast nitrate was decomposing, and initiatives to copy everything to acetate safety stock, which we know has its own decomposition problems. But as the years have gone by, the decomp situation with nitrate has proved pretty complicated. Whether it's due to particular film stocks, processing practices, or even things like film cement that was used on splices, certain film elements have decomposed rapidly, while others have remained in even projectable condition for over 100 years. What is clear, however, is that just as warmer vault conditions prior to the implementation of HVAC systems increase the risk of fires, warmer temperatures will accelerate the decomposition process. Films lost to decomposition, I would say, are sometimes failures of conservation and preservation. So what I mean by that is, in the case of conservation, Anecdotally, I've had friends who are film collectors who are kind of part of that community, and I've heard stories of collectors who have very large collections, and they can't look at it all the time, so they'll look at something and come back in 10 years, and because they were storing it in their house or whatever, it has decomposed quite quickly, and there's nothing there anymore. But also with an archival kind of context, focused on the preservation side of things, that can also be an issue. Because even a film that's stored in ideal temperature, humidity control can continue to decay. And we try to check things as much as possible. So we're trying to look at things, everything in the collection, so often we'll kind of come around and we'll do an inspection of that. Sometimes even in ideal situations, a film can decay. And so looking at films that are starting to decay is kind of how things get picked for preservation projects, or it's certainly one of the major factors that we consider. An example of a film lost to decomposition that's pretty famous is Ernst Lubitsch's The Patriot, which is not completely lost, but a large amount of it was decomposed over the years. And it is, I believe, the only film that's been nominated for Best Picture that is not available. Here's just some more macro gore shots of nitrate decomposition that I took. The interesting thing about nitrate decomp is that it's somehow at the same time both gooey and kind of crispy. It reminds me a lot of like baklava or Butterfingers. Intentional destruction. This one is kind of hard to wrap our minds around now, unless you're a soulless CEO, very business-minded, then it might make perfect sense. But before home video and television, the commercial life of a film was pretty short. If a film was a big hit, they might re-release it later, or if an actor who was featured later became a huge star, they might represent the film with kind of advertising that's kind of centering this actor. Another example might be like when Valentino died, a number of his films were back to theaters because audiences really wanted to see them. But that was really the extent of it. Films were seen as kind of disposable after that point. And so a lot of times what would happen with studios was that they would use the material for what they could. So sometimes films would be cut up, they'd be used as clips in other productions, sometimes reduced to condensed versions that would be available on the small gauge market, or butchered into stock footage. So the footage from films would then be used when they needed stock footage from the stock footage library to be used for all manner of purposes. And the kind of the lowest rung of this, or maybe like the most disturbing, is films just being scrapped and sent away to get the silver recovered chemically. So there's not even a trace left. Those films have been completely destroyed. Kind of a famous example of that kind of thing is a bunch of Star films, George Méliès's company, where the films were used during World War I for boot heels for soldiers, and obviously stripped of their silver as well. All right, and last of the four, record keeping. So if you remember that Wikipedia's definition of lost films used the phrase "not known to exist," and we're talking about unique materials, fires, decomposition, intentional destruction, all have to do with the kind of exist side of things. But record keeping, the last one I wanted to talk about, is all about that known to part. So knowing what you have in your collection. I can guarantee right now that there are lost films sitting in film archives, and they're lost because they're under a different title, or the cataloging is not sufficient, or something like that. Now, on a micro level, archives and film collectors might not know what they have because their collections are so large. There's also a more macro issue, which is just barriers in communication. between archives and other institutions, archives and collectors and other collectors. An example that comes to mind with this category is something that Anthony Labate actually talked about in the previous In Focus, which is that the film The Unknown, which the museum restored recently, back in the, I want to say the 50s or so, when there was presumably material at the Cinémathèque Française. Henri Langlois had promised to kind of send the nitrate that they had here to James Card, but couldn't find it. And it turned out that because the film's title was The Unknown, it had actually been shelved in the area of the archive for unidentified films. Whether that's apocryphal or not, I don't know. But it illustrates this kind of issue of record keeping, where if you don't know what you have, you may have lost films. Related to cataloging, I wanted to talk a little bit about confirming whether a film is lost or not, because it's not a simple process. Sometimes it involves reaching out to the archive community to see if any institutions hold elements in their collections. For many years, the Library of Congress maintained the American Silent Feature Film Database, which you can view here, which was searchable and open to the public, showing the locations, the archival locations of existing materials if you look up a American silent feature film. Or you would see no holdings found, and you were able to confirm to the best of your ability that it was a lost film. This database was unfortunately taken down a couple of years ago, but I understand it will return in the near future, so hopefully take a look out for that. And here is the International Federation of Film Archives, or FIAF, their treasures from the Film Archives database. This is also specifically looking at silent era films, but it does include shorts as well as features, and from all different countries. This one is restricted to archives. It's not available to the general public. And it doesn't obviously account for sound films. But it is a good resource internally to kind of look at what other institutions have. Anything that's sound that's later on involves a lot of emailing. The Association of Moving Image Archivists is an institution that hosts a listserv, and a lot of times people will reach out through that saying, does anybody have this? Does anybody have that? And that's a way that confirming whether materials are unique is done. All right, so the second half of this bifurcation are found films, or lost films being found. This is mainly going to be a bunch of different examples or case studies. I'm going to move from just a few famous examples of found films and then talk about some here at the George Eastman Museum, just so you can kind of get an idea of the different ways that films are found and come back into the public sphere. This is a pretty famous example, the Edison adaptation of Frankenstein from 1910, which was produced in 1910 and then kind of forgotten about for a period of time. In the early 60s, I think a film historian, a researcher, discovered a famous photo that was published from the film, and so there was a ton of interest. This film actually was on a number of lists of lost films that people really wanted to see because nobody had material on it. But actually, the whole time, a film collector did have a copy of this, but he was the only one who knew about it until he told everyone else. So that's kind of what I was referencing in the beginning of this presentation, where it was a lost film because it was not known to exist other than that one film collector. Today, happily, that collector's films are all at the Library of Congress, and so this film was restored a number of years ago. And if you search it now, you can see the restored version right on the Library of Congress website. Some recent ones that are pretty exciting. So just a few years ago, a collector in the UK purchased an antique toy projector on eBay. And when he got it, discovered that there was a little bit of film in the projector. And it turned out to be a section of film from the 1917 Cleopatra with Theda Bara, which has been a incredibly sought-after lost film. and that material was previously destroyed in the Fox fire at Little Ferry that I mentioned earlier. Two more recent examples that have been in the news quite recently. A John Ford film, The Heart of Lincoln, a lost version of it. So there was some material existing, but not this original version of it, which was found by an intern at a stock footage library. If I'm thinking of the right one, if I'm not getting a little confused here. And next to that, we have a Clara Bow film that was actually found. A collector purchased a lot. There was someone selling in Omaha just kind of pallets of films, and they purchased that, and it turned out to be one of Clara Bow's films that was not thought to be extant. All right. But moving on, I wanted to talk about just a few recent acquisitions to the George Eastman Museum that involved lost films. And this is just a kind of selection since I started working here several years ago, and ones that are kind of exciting and also just show the difference in the way some of these lost films are found. All right. So in late summer of 2022, the museum was contacted by a potential donor out in Texas. My colleague Patrick Tiernan and I flew out to El Paso to pick up the collection. The story behind this one is really interesting. This gentleman here is Arthur Needham. He had actually won these films in a poker game in the 70s. He was not a film collector himself, but he kept the films all these years because he was trying to prove a point to his friend about betting too much in a poker game that you can't live without. This collection mostly consisted of westerns, both silent and sound westerns, as well as parts of serials. There was a Tarzan serial as a part of that. And they were stored, as you can see, in these metal lined boxes here in his garage for many, many years. Here you can see once we got them back to the archive, there was a lot of both rust and nitrate decomposition here. So you can see the tarp on the floor. We knew it was going to be a messy process. So we wanted to take precautions as we took a look at everything and tried to identify what we had. One of, I think, the most interesting identifications that came out of that is this film, Hell's Crater, from 1918. So you can see here an example of an intertitle. This is one of my favorite intertitles I found working here. For God's sake, take me out of this living hell, which I think about on my bad days. So silent film intertitles are a great aid to identification, since you can sometimes, not in that example necessarily, but a number of these intertitles had character names and setting names. And so you can use those to kind of search and get an idea of what some possibilities of what your film may be. So in this case, the names Cherry and Jim Shamrock were in some of the intertitles that led to us identifying the film as Hell's Crater, which was, a 1918 Universal Western starring Grace Kennard. And looking it up, it was present on the Library of Congress's Lost U.S. Silent Feature Films list. The film was released as a 5-reel feature originally, and we received 3 reels. So it is currently incomplete, but it is the only existing material on this film. Blackmail. This is an example of how rough the state of lost film discoveries can be sometimes. We received an initially unknown reel of nitrate from a donor in Binghamton. It was clear upon seeing it that there was some intense decomposition going on. We were lucky that the outside of the reel was less affected, so we were able to confirm that the film's title was Blackmail, and that it was Reel 6 of the 1920 film, made by the pre-MGM production company Metro Pictures, starring Viola Dana. This is not to be confused with the 1929 Hitchcock film, which is very much not lost. But this one was lost. It was present on that list of lost American films, so we were able to confirm the uniqueness pretty quickly. So here's a look at what the reel looked like on the bench. You can see the honey-like blisters that have bubbled up on the film, and if you look at those lighter sections underneath the blisters and powder, which are kind of visible there, those little light patches, you can see the trouble up ahead that you'll see in a second. But there's a fair amount of good footage. You can see the image looks quite clear on that left photo, and there's a great example of the golden age of intertidal art, which I just love. That's next to that. But you can see the image loss creeping in, and also how the decomposition has sapped the film of pliability, those edges having fused to the neighboring wind. As I got further into the reel, you can see the image loss gets much worse. This intertidal here is almost unreadable, but it says, "I need you more than ever before in my life," which is what I was telling the film at this point. Don't decay, I need you. By the halfway point, the film was clearly in this hockey puck stage mentioned earlier. At this point, there's no image present to save. The base has transformed into a solid, crunchy crystalline mass that chips and flakes away when prodded. You can see here in that photo that I was wearing vinyl gloves for this rather than standard cotton gloves, as they would have been immediately soiled with the nitrate dust that was coming off this film. In this case, the only thing that could be done was to try and save fragments of the remaining film that hadn't succumbed to decomp. Nitrate decomp often spreads radially through a reel, which affects sections of every wind. This makes separating the surviving material from the unsalvageable stuff a tricky task because you have thousands of winds in a reel, and that decomp just shows up every time you wind around. So you'll have good, bad, just repeated over and over. I think of it, the vein of nitrate spreading through the reel is a little like sections of chocolate that cut diagonally through like a pint of ice cream. So so there's a lot of repetition of the good and the bad here. And everything sort of flakes off, as you can see, too. It's just tons of chunks coming off. Some of this, as you can see, there's total image loss, and some of it is salvageable, but very, very fragile. By the end of the film reel, this film had unfortunately, totally solidified. I think yesterday Emma said it looked a little like a cinnamon bun when she first looked at it. This is the Butterfinger stage, and it's sad because there's no possibility of saving anything from chunks like this. Any image that was there is long gone. So I tried to get as close as possible to the solidified mass. So I collected the little bits that were left, sometimes just a frame at a time that had intertidal or image present, and we just kind of grouped all those, and I also recorded the order in which I found them. So the results of this work, really at the end, were a couple of film cores with the longest unmarred sections, and then the rest is really just clippings that we are keeping in the can. Okay. This is the last case study I wanted to talk about, one of the more exciting recent ones, which is 2 reels of very early films. In the summer of 2023, the Moving Image Department was contacted by a woman who had purchased a trunk which contained a projector and 2 reels of nitrate film. The person she purchased the trunk from had a family member who had operated a theater in Colorado around the turn of the century, and so the films had been with the family since that time. This is a rare occasion where we actually have a very clear view of the film's provenance. The donor very kindly decided to gift the films to us here, and we were able to coordinate shipping of the films from Arkansas, where the donor lives, here to the museum. And as a little collection management digression, As of several years ago, the new Department of Transportation guidelines allow for small amounts of nitrate film to be shipped as what is called a limited quantity without standard dangerous goods protocols. Beyond just making shipments cheaper, it greatly improves the ability to work with donors or anyone who doesn't have dangerous goods shipping certification, as most people don't. The 2 reels that were donated contained 3 films each, which you can see here. And they range from comedy to drama to actuality footage. So there were 2 actualities. You can see the upper left there, a view down a wide, bustling main street in what appears to be a kind of mountainous locale. Below that, there's a view of a public swimming pool. There's also 2 comedies, a typical park bench Chaplin-esque style comedy in the middle on the bottom. And then there's one that was primarily a chase comedy along the beach with one of the actors in drag the whole time. That's the middle upper. There was also in the upper right a dramatic film. Looks something to do with a sick child, and I think the father is kind of mid-collapse here. But that last film on the bottom right was part of the donation that really caught my attention. It's a dance film, what's known as a cakewalk, and I'll talk about that in a minute. A primary issue with films like this is identification, because there were almost no titles of any kind present. The drama film had an American Mutoscope and Biograph Company end title, copyright 1904, but that was as far as titles went. Clearly, from what we know of the provenance and just taking a look at the films themselves, they're quite old, from the first decade or so of cinema. I'm going to focus on 3 of the films from this donation. So basically one of the complete reels, and that's because I'm very happy to say that our Film Preservation Services team were able to scan one of them, very fragile reel that they were able to scan, specifically for this presentation. So we can all watch them in a few minutes, which is a little mind-blowing because I'm pretty confident that this is the first time these films have been seen in perhaps over 100 years. But let's talk about them first. So here's the public pool actuality footage. You see here there's a crowded public pool with a bunch of young men taking turns jumping off a diving board. Without having a title on this one, it's hard to say for certain if it is unique or it might not exist somewhere else, but I think it's probably unlikely. There are 2 interesting things to note about this film. Both of them I didn't notice during inspection. It was actually only once it had been scanned that I was able to notice them. One of them's fun, one of them's not fun. And say the first one, the not fun one, is I noticed while viewing it that one of the divers is in blackface, which is unsurprising given the time, but changes the nature of the film a bit, since there's an obvious awareness the divers have of the camera, and the blackface kind of speaks to some performative element to that film. The second thing I'm going to let you see for yourself, but I will just say that it's historically interesting in the way that the film was printed. And there's a little view of the middle. This is kind of in the very middle of that film. You have the word stop and frame. So just look out for that when we watch them. All right. The second film on the reel was this park bench comedy. And this one was actually, we had it marked in our cataloging system as unidentified park bench comedy up until a few weeks ago when the films were scanned. It was only viewing the film and then trying to search around kind of plot elements, although this is a very generic kind of comedy. The park bench, it's a whole subgenre of early silent comedy. Luckily, well, first actually I want to plug Media History Digital Library. One of the most amazing resources out there for film research, and it is totally available to anyone who wants to use it. They have millions of pages from trade journals and movie magazines and catalogs and amateur film periodicals and all sorts of things having to do with film history. So if you're interested in any of that kind of thing, it's just such an amazing resource, and I can't talk about it enough. But it was through using Media History Digital Library that I discovered a catalog that Selig Polyscope, a Chicago film production company, had made in 1907, and found this. So there's 2 things here that are really interesting. There is a catalog for this film called The Amorous Tramp. that is 150 feet, and it has that image there. And then there's also, later on in the catalog, a entry for this film, Foxy Hobos, which is longer. And if you compare the plot descriptions of the two films, they're similar up until the point that Foxy Hobos kind of continues on a little bit. If you look at the price, Foxy Hobos is more expensive if you were buying the film outright to screen. And it's longer than The Amorous Tramp. So with taking that frame grab there, comparing with the scanned film, you can see it's the same film. You can see the trees in the background. It's a little grainier of a view. So what we discovered was this film, end to end, seems to match up more with the Amorous Tramp catalog. And so what was done, I believe, was that they would shoot the film, they would have a longer version and a shorter version, depending on your budget to buy. You could buy the shorter version, and that's what this is. All right, so the really exciting one to me is this Cakewalk film. As I said, I was excited when I first inspected this. First of all, just because it was not super common to see black performers in films this early. These are all very, very early films. As we've seen earlier, blackface was quite prevalent, so this seemed to be something important, that there were actual black performers here. But more exciting than that was that one of the performers actually looked familiar, specifically the man in the image on the right. This is a photo I took when I first inspected the film, trying to get a better kind of image of his face. So you might remember several years ago, there was a film discovered at USC by archivist Dino Everett and then identified by Dr. Allison Nadia Field at the University of Chicago, which is this film, Something Good Negro Kiss from 1898. And he looked a lot like the man in this film. This film got a lot of attention when it was discovered a few years ago because it was the first filmed kiss between a black couple. And it's very charming and natural and free from a lot of this racial stereotyping that black performers are often forced to submit to at the time. And it was shot at Selig Polyscope studio in Chicago, the same as The Amorous Tramp. The performers here are Saint Subtle and Gertie Brown, who are a vaudeville duo. They looked to me to be the same, and I sent a number of images to Dr. Field, and she confirmed that they were indeed the same performers. In fact, she thinks that the film was likely shot during the same visit that this film, Something Good, was. And when you watch the film, they actually share a kiss, similar to this, during their dance. The four performers were known as the Ragtime Four, and they were a prominent vaudeville cakewalk dance group at the time. If you look at some of the film, again, this is from Something Good, but you can see very slightly, if you look at the very left border of the frame, a little black dot kind of printed into the border of the frame. And that is a clue because that's a Lumiere perforation. And Selig, at Selig Polyscope, was using a modified cinematograph for his films. So if we go back to this here, you can see that same little black dot near the edge of the left side of the frame there. So I think, yeah, at this point, I want to show the films here. It's ready. Okay. There's something very incredible about seeing films from the 1890s, as that last one was. That's very charming when she knocks off his hat. That just kind of brings it home for me. I just wanted to mention that with unique materials, these particular films are not preserved. They've been scanned for this presentation, but like all things, eventually, the plan, going back to that initial graphic in the kind of life cycle of a film is to get funding and then to have those films preserved photochemically, at which point digital versions can be made more accessible. It's the nature of these things, and I think seeing them is an incredible. It's part of the process of, for me, identification. There were some of these things I couldn't identify until I was able to see them moving. But ultimate preservation and then access is the goal for these films. So yeah, that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, but thank you so much for coming out today. Yeah.
Two things.
Yeah.
What was the large cane-like thing he was carrying that looked like a stove, like the cakewalk?
The cakewalk? Let's pull that up again.
Kirk,
Do you mind repeating the question?
He had
Oh,
something
yes.
over his arm, or he's holding on to it, but then he flipped it and it went over his arm.
Yeah, the question.
Like a pipe or something,
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I'm knowledgeable enough to answer that.
Just wondered.
That is a good question for Dr. Field. I'm sure she is very aware of what that.
The second thing is, this is rather heartbreaking, but one of my dad's favorite stories about being a child, he was born in 1921, so by the 30s or whatever, he's a young teenager. In New York City, they'd go roller skating around and they'd pick up all nitrate films and set them on fire that the theaters just threw out.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was fun. That was, it was one of his happiest memories of.
I've never heard anything like that
fires.
before. Yeah, you can see in the presentation during that nitrate fire slide, that was actually as a part of the film preservation program here, when there is scrap nitrate, Deborah Stoiber, our collection manager, will take it outside to show the students how flammable it is, because it's incredible just how quickly it burns up.
Are films still archived here?
Yes, absolutely. All the films I was talking about have come into the archive within the past 2 or 3 years.
Comes to mind that Jim Carr, who I'm sure you've heard of,
Yes.
was friends with Cecil B. DeMille. And when Cecil B. DeMille passed in the early 60s, I believe, Jim went out there to California for the funeral. And he got into a discussion with the widow of Cecil B. DeMille. Sort of like Jim took a shine to him. And he convinced her to have Cecil B. DeMille's film archived at the George Eastman House. Are they still here?
They are indeed still here. And a good number of them have been a focus of preservation, restoration projects. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All
I
right.
have a question.
Yeah.
You used in describing, I can't remember the full name of the film, the Amorous something.
Amherst Tramp.
Amorous Track. And you referred to it as the catalog was this long. What is the term? I hadn't heard that as a way of describing. So what does it mean when you say the catalog? Because I immediately think like paper catalog, but obviously you're referring to the film. Right?
Yeah, yes. So the document, and this is a question about the Amherst Tramp, about the usage of the word catalog. So the document was a catalog of films and equipment available from Selig Polyscope. And so the first half of it was all different projectors and equipment you could buy, and the second half of it was all films that you could buy. And so those are two different entries in that document that were describing the films that you could buy. And it seemed like, looking at some of the other entries, that process of offering both a longer version of the film and a shorter version under two different titles was pretty common. They did it a number of times. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah.
Is when the nitrate goes fully decomp, is that just a solid rock at that point, or is there no rehydration that could possibly happen?
Yeah, good question. So about nitrate film when it's reached its hockey puck stage. No, with nitrate decomp, there's really nothing you can do, because it's decomposed to the extent that any emulsion that was once there is no longer there. Now, if you have something like really shrunken film, there are processes you can do to try and get film like that back to a state to where it can be scanned or preserved. But with nitrate decomposition that looked like that did, there's no going back from that, fortunately. Yeah.
Before it gets to that it, I guess?
Yes, so I mean, one of the things, Deb always talks about film yoga as one of the things. So with the nitrate, we like to inspect it so often so that it's kind of, it's being wound from one plate to the next, it's getting some air, it's not just sitting in a very tight wind for years where that decomp can kind of build on itself with gases that aren't able to escape and that sort of thing. But also, up to a certain point, decomp is still, if the film is not too brittle to go through laboratory equipment or a scanner, it can still be worked with. It's really, that's why things that are starting to decompose shoot up to the top of preservation priorities, because they have a limited amount of time before it gets to a certain extent. So it's all about trying to catch those films before they get to that point where nothing can be done.
So there's no stopping it or slowing it down?
There's, under ideal vault conditions, it won't decay as quickly as if it's in like a hot attic or something. It's the same thing with vinegar syndrome, which affects acetate. They both, bad environments will make it worse, but there's no stopping it or reversing it or any of that sort of thing.
You mentioned the holy grail of lost films was London.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Recently, I got online and it's my holy grail too.
Mm.
Everyone wants to find that film in a corner of a garret in Amsterdam sometime. Not London, I know, but hey, you never can tell.
Right.
But they attempted to make an AI copy of it. And they called it a restoration. How did they get away with that? But I watched a little bit of it, 52 minutes of it, in fact.
Yeah.
And I watched about, I would say, 8 or 9 minutes of it. And it was like, it scan, stop, repeat, scan, stop, repeat with the AI. Do you think AI has a future in, film preservation? Or?
I certainly think AI has a future. It's seeming to become more prevalent in every aspect of life, but I don't think any usage with film preservation would be considered true preservation or restoration in my book. You see a lot of the videos these days online where people have taken archival film scans and then they've up-res them and they've colorized them with AI so that they look like video pretty much. And a lot of that, as you said, gets called restoration, but it's such a transformation of the original film that I don't think there's any world where we would call that restoration.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you guys.